So we're rearranging the furniture. We are going to have our last group of speakers, and they are representing two agencies that are going to provide a glimpse of how we can shape the future by addressing our own outlook and coping mechanisms. And so we have three. Each one will present and make a little presentation about their area. If you look back at the history of our General Assembly, we've had Rick Cole, City Manager of Santa Monica, on several of our programs. Under Rick's leadership, Santa Monica not only responds to the most pressing existing problems in their city, but also is taking actions to prepare for the future. When we found out that Santa Monica had a new Office of Civic Well-Being, we asked Rick to join us to tell us why, how it came to be, and what it is supposed to accomplish. In the South Bay, go ahead and sit down, thank you very much. And in the South Bay, the Beach Cities Health District, under the leadership of CEO Tom Bakaly, is also concerned with civic well-being and has been researching these issues in the cities they cover, which are the beach cities, Redondo, Hermosa, and Manhattan Beach. Through their Blue Zones project, managed by Laura Nakano in the center, they have also created programs to address the issues of stress, health, and well-being. So the three of them will tell us about well-being and the next frontier. Thank you so much for being here.
So good afternoon. We have had a remarkable day, and I heard, as you all did, the applause for Dr. Soon-Shiong and what remarkable opportunities he's seizing for the future. It's exciting to hear about those things happening in the private sector. What about the public sector? What are the opportunities that we are going to seize? Whether you're an elected official here today, whether you're a citizen volunteer who serves on a commission or in civic leadership roles, whether you're a city staff person, the question is, are we going to be able to applaud the kind of extraordinary innovation that we saw coming from the private sector? What are we doing to adjust to a changing world? So this is the question that I think we ought to start with. If you ask city managers, well, what do we do? What do cities do? The answer is obvious. Oh, we're the people that do fire, police, libraries. We do public works. We regulate land use. That's what cities do. It's not a mystery. It's not a trick question. It's obvious. We've been doing it for a long time. We're in the business of being in the business we're in. The problem with that is if you ask newspaper publishers 20 years ago, you'd say, well, what do you do? Well, we print news on paper, right? That's what newspapers do. It's called a newspaper. The idea that news could come digitally totally has disrupted that business model. If you asked travel agents 20 years ago, oh, what do travel agents do? Well, we help people travel, right? We're their agents, right? Because you can't book a flight to Tahiti by yourself. You can't find a hotel in the south of France. That's our job. How many of those jobs now exist? So being in the business of being in the business you're in means you'll soon be out of business. And probably the best example of this are fire trucks and the fire service. When was the first municipal fire department in America started? Ben Franklin had a volunteer fire department. I'm talking about a city fire department. Cincinnati, Ohio, 1853. In 1852, Cincinnati burned down. The factory where the fire started, the guy decided, well, I'm going to go into a different business. I'm going to manufacture fire engines. These were, of course, horse-drawn. But he manufactured the iPhone of fire engines in 1853. And guess who his first customer was? The city. The city bought it because the year before the town burned down. Now imagine, you actually can watch this on YouTube, the city council proceedings from 1853. And there was a guy from the Chamber of Commerce who said, what the hell business is it of the government to be in the fire business? It's a private sector. Right? And taxpayers came out and they said, we're going to have a bunch of beefy guys sitting around a fire station on our dime? Right? It actually was a remarkable, it wasn't an obvious thing to start. What I'm saying is it wasn't obvious to start a municipal fire department. Unless your town burned down, right? And then it's like, something's not working with the Ben Franklin volunteer model. So we're at that stage now in 2019 where all the things that we currently do were invented 100 or 150 years ago for industrial America. Why do we have fire departments? Because in 1853 things were mostly made out of wood and we mostly used fire to heat our homes and to run our factories. In Santa Monica last year, our fire department went on 17,000 calls for service, emergency 911 calls for service. Guess how many of them were for fires? We had 47 fires. That's less than one a week, right? We spent $42 million on our fire department. Now, was that a waste? No, we had 17,000 calls. What were most of them for? Were they for fires? No. What were they for? Medical, right? So this is just one example. Whether you talk about libraries, whether you talk about parks, whatever you talk about, we're not living in 1853. And so if we're going to avoid the fate of travel agents or newspapers, and whenever I say this, people say, oh, well, that's different. That's the private sector. There'll always be a city of Torrance. There'll always be a city of Redondo Beach. Well, go try and go to a Blockbuster today, right? A city isn't going to move in, Netflix isn't going to move in and take over your business. What's going to happen is your taxpayers are going to say, well, we're not getting value. And they're going to stop paying. And with Prop 218, they can do that. Right? So we'll go out of business not because a competitor comes in and runs us out of business. We'll go out of business because we aren't providing the value for today's world. That's the revolution that we're talking about in terms of well-being. So well-being sounds kind of abstract and kind of, at the high end of the Maslow's scale of needs, right? There's food and there's shelter and there's work. That's the basic stuff. That's the hard stuff. But in today's world, when you can go anywhere, if you have an education and you're in good health, and you can work anywhere, and you can live anywhere, why are people going to want to live here? Well, it's a nice weather, right? But if the housing prices are sky high, if the traffic is miserable, if the taxes are through the roof, how do we compete in a world economy in which people can go and live and work anywhere? Ultimately, what research is showing is that well-being is not some abstract. It's in fact a key piece of a competitive edge for why people want to be in a place and how they can work together and how healthy they are as individuals and as a community. And that when you think about, we didn't invent fire departments really to put out fires. We invented fire departments to protect human health and safety and property, right? So if you go to the why, we didn't invent fire departments for fires any more than we invented them to go after heart attacks. We invented them to protect public health and safety. So really what well-being is about is redefining what is our objective, what is our outcome, what does success look like? Does success look like having 47 fires? Yes, as a matter of fact, right? We used to have a lot more fires, but now we have great building codes, now we have very well-trained fire departments, we have public education. It's a tremendous success. So what about homelessness, right? If this was 1853, someone would be saying, well, let's start a Department of Homelessness. And then the Chamber of Commerce would come out and they'd say that's a terrible idea, and the taxpayers would come out and say that's a terrible idea. Our fire department went to 2,604 homeless calls last year. 47 fires, but their patch doesn't say Department of Homelessness, right? It says Fire Department. And homelessness touches our library, it touches public works in our parks, it touches our police department, it touches our community and cultural services department. So what well-being is about is thinking about what is the well-being of a human being. And if someone is homeless or mentally ill or has a drug and alcohol addiction, that's a well-being problem. So we were among 300 cities nationwide who applied for the first ever Bloomberg Philanthropy Mayor's Challenge. People from all over the country had these clever ideas. We had done some work because we had a high school student who committed suicide, and we had a high school student who was shot in a gang killing within a couple of months of each other. And here's Santa Monica, which thinks of itself as a great place to raise kids with these searing tragedies, and said maybe we ought to think again about the well-being of our young people. And so we created the first ever youth well-being index to measure how well actually are we doing, and what are the areas where we could do better, and how do we prevent tragedies. By the way, that was the last teenage gang shooting in our community. And we won the well-being challenge, one of 5 cities selected out of 300 American cities, because we said we wanted to do a well-being index for our community. We want to take the work we were doing on youth and apply it to our whole community. And so we got $1 million from Bloomberg Philanthropies, and we partnered with the Rand Institute, and we looked all over the world at people who've done research in the academic world and in the practical world, countries like New Zealand, interesting experiments all over the world. How do you measure well-being? What's the 21st century version of health and safety, right? It's ultimately about well-being. And so we developed the first ever well-being index. We've won all sorts of awards, but that's really not the point. What I'm here to talk to you about is how that's changing the way we look at government, how that's the foundation for creating a 21st century government. So, we're starting to use data. We churned up all kinds of useful and interesting data, but data isn't useful unless you use it. So, for one thing, we found that one of our zip codes had a low level of fruit and vegetable consumption, right? If there's such a thing as a food desert, right? We read about places in low-income neighborhoods where there's no fresh foods. Santa Monica's a food jungle, right? We have a Whole Foods, we have a 365, we have a Trader Joe's, we have a Gelson's, we have 4 farmers markets. I mean, you can't go 3 blocks without running into fresh food. And yet our people weren't eating it in the Pico neighborhood because they're low income. And so what we did was we said, okay, how do we solve that? Right? We've got a farmer's market, we've got all this fruit and vegetables, but we don't have people. So one of the things is getting onto CalFresh, right? We found that a remarkably low percentage of those who qualified were actually signing up for it. So we brought the county to the farmer's market instead of having people have to go to the county and sign up. And we dramatically increased 2 things. One, the percentage of people who are actually receiving CalFresh, and 2, the number of people who are using CalFresh vouchers in our farmers market. The Fitbit gave out 200 Fitbits to a randomly selected group of people in that same zip code to promote exercise and wellness. And it, of course, it spreads because everyone says, oh, what's that? You know, what's a Fitbit? And explain it. In the same neighborhood, we got a $25,000 prize from the Robert Wood Johnson's Foundation because of the work we've been doing in well-being. And we gave out $500 micro grants with that $25,000. And doing amazing work. It's amazing what people will do with $500. One of them is creating a new kind of innovation lab, a kind of new incubator for people who do food products in their homes, for doing things that you can't find in the market, that come from their cultural traditions, that they're now selling, right? With $500 investment. We're a city with a budget of $420 million a year. Those $500 were the best money we ever spent. So, and then one of the things that came through is, despite our sense that we're a big city with a small town heart, a lot of people really didn't know their neighbors, right? In this busy world, we can on Facebook, we can look up our junior high school friends that now live in Saskatchewan, but we don't know the person that lives us next door, right? So one of the things is getting a block party permit in our city was mind-bogglingly complicated. So we just made it simple. So now we've got lots more block parties where people can meet their neighbor. Very low tech, but again, when we spend $420 million on stuff, there's a lot of stuff that we could, just by doing things differently, we could create value. So we're really building our whole budget now. We're building our whole budget around the idea of outcomes, right? Rather, we used to do our budget by department, by line item, right? The department's spending this much money on people, this much money on equipment, this much money on technology, this much money on supplies, and down to the paper clips, right? Now we're looking at what are we doing in learning? What are we doing in health? What are we doing in economic opportunity, community, safety, place and planet, which is what, the built environment as well as our environmental concerns. And then we mapped all the things we do. In Santa Monica, it turns out we do 668 things. We do a lot of different things in our government. Some of them are internal, like we pay people, right? We have a payroll function. Some people do that outside. We do it inside. But many of those things, like in our public works department, we maintain the streets, we maintain the sidewalks, we deal with the stormwater. All of those things, the question is, what are the outcomes? How do those things make us better off? And I want to conclude with this comment. Right now, you can tell your voters or your neighbors or your constituents, however you think of the residents of your communities in the South Bay. You can tell them, we're doing a great job. We won some awards. We paved this many lane miles last year. We have a balanced budget. We're still in the world of public education 20 years ago, when if you moved to a community and you said, well, how good is this school? You go find somebody, oh, well, my kids went there 10 years ago. It's a pretty good school. Or I know a teacher that teaches there. It's a really good school. But today, as you know, because of the revolution in public education, you can go online from any place on the planet and you can see what fourth grade scores, classroom by classroom, were compared against other California communities of similar demographics or the state as a whole, right? Now, not everybody loves that, but it's a huge advance, and is anybody going to give that up, right? Is anybody going to say, oh, let's abolish testing our students, and let's just go back to anecdotal evidence? The value proposition for the public sector, for our communities, for us having a balanced budget 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, for us even existing 10, 20, 30 years down the road, is we've got to demonstrate the value we're providing. We've got to demonstrate that because of what we did, people are healthier, people are succeeding more, their standard of living is increasing, or their quality of life is improving, and we've got to begin to get our arms around measuring those things, and then do more of what works and less of what doesn't work. If we don't do that, we'll go the way of Blockbuster. If we do that, we have as bright a future as Netflix. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. It's great to be on the stage with Rick. We worked together in Pasadena about 30 years ago, and it's good to be on the stage with him. So Lauren and I came up with this title. I'm gonna cop to it right up front. We're kind of geeks. We go back to Star Trek, The Final Frontier. We think that well-being is the next stage. We want to talk with you a little bit about that today. So I was city manager in Hermosa a few years ago, and I was down on Pier Plaza with a friend. It sounds like the beginning of a joke, right? The city manager walks down to Pier Plaza, but it's not a joke. What happens is we're standing there, a car pulls up right there on Hermosa Avenue. A car pulls in behind him, and the guy in the first car throws a cigarette out the window. The guy in the second car gets out of his car, goes over, picks up the cigarette, and flicks it back into the guy's car. And the guy I'm with says, "That's Hermosa," and so I have mixed reactions to that. There's a part of me that says, "Right on, way to be." But when I get quiet for a moment, I think the second guy was wrong. He might have been wrong for the right reasons, but he was wrong. He might have been okay, sort of on the physical health side of things. Okay. Smoking, one of the single most unhealthy things you could do. All right, I don't know if he changed that guy's behavior. From an environmental standpoint, was he effective? Well, he picked up one cigarette butt, maybe not. So how effective was he? I was thinking of a conversation I had with my 20-year-old a couple weeks ago, and I said, "Henry, would you rather be, happy and effective, or would you rather be right?" And he looked at me like I was high and said, "Right." And I think we have to resist the temptation. I have to resist the temptation to act like a 20-year-old when I'm in a position of leadership. And so let's talk a little bit kind of about what that looks like. Rick talked about overall well-being. We're the Beach Cities Health District. We're a special service district that works with the three cities of Redondo, Hermosa, and Manhattan Beach. And what we're seeing is our problem is stress. We're fairly physically healthy, not unlike the cigarette flicker, okay on physical side, not so much on the emotional side. What we're seeing is high levels of stress. We're seeing, and I'm not gonna do the PowerPoint karaoke, I'm gonna spare you that, but what we're seeing, for instance, daily stress in the beach cities, the three beach cities, is at the same levels of post-Katrina Louisiana. That's mind-blowing. Some of you are nodding. Others are saying, how can that be? How can you be stressed in the beach cities? How can that be? And when I was in Park City, we used to call that the Grey Poupon problem, right? When you run out of mustard, kind of what's your emergency? I think what we have to do is we have to resist that temptation, because what we're seeing are real health impacts related to that. We're seeing suicide ideation among our youth higher than national averages. We're seeing suicide among adults and reducing their life expectancy higher than national average. We're seeing substance use and abuse higher than the national average. And so these are things that people are doing. This is the level of stress that we're seeing in the beach cities. And what we've done is we've worked with the cities, and we're developing programs, and we're going to share some of those with you today. Another issue is loneliness. We heard a little bit about this today. That's something that is just as lethal as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. These are studies that people do. We can do the slap fight, right, that happens at the national level of debating data, but these are numbers from Gallup. These are numbers from surveys that we've been doing. And I think this is a key definition. As somebody that spent 28 years in local government, I kind of get that. Loneliness is not being alone. It's the feeling that nobody cares. I think, hundreds and hundreds of council meetings, I think people, they may not want you to agree with them, but they just want to know that you care.
They also want to know that you agree with them.
Right, that too. We'll get to the dialogue later, Rick. So y'all probably know this guy. You're maybe saying to your fellow council member, didn't we see him the other night? And I don't think he's lonely. I think he's stressed. And so what we're going to talk a little bit is, as leaders, how do we adapt to that? How do we handle ourselves with that? But also, how do we work with our community so this guy doesn't get to this point? So Lauren's going to talk a little bit about some of the programs we have going on and some of the data around this. But one of the things we use are like nudge signs, or where do you go, right, when this is happening to you? Maybe you're saying to your city manager, please make this stop, or this is not a good nudge sign. We don't want you doing that one. And so, maybe you're going to your happy place, whatever that happy place might be. I'm thinking of the starfish in Finding Nemo, right, when they're banging on the aquarium. So, but what we want you to think of is just breathe. Let's just take a moment here. And are there ways in which maybe we can have our communities do this? This is something that Hermosa's done at their council meetings. They've done a mindful minute before the council meeting on a contentious issue. And I had my back to the room, so I don't know what happened exactly, but it seemed to go very well. The temperature came down, and can it be that simple? And that's something that we want to talk with you about more. Lauren's going to get into some of the science behind this.
Great, thanks, Tom. And Tom and I are going to tag team a little, so I'm going to cover. So I think Rick really said it nicely, and really I think threw out a challenge about, what does well-being have to do with cities? And I think for the health district, for us, we define it by the 5 elements of well-being, and some of those are about purpose. Do people have a sense of why they get up in the morning and what their life is about? We have Kathleen Terry here who does workshops for those in our cities. We also know that managing your economic life has a huge impact on people's well-being. And then liking where you live and feeling safe and having pride about your community, those are also aspects of well-being that you wouldn't normally think of when you talk about that. Usually we hear eat right and exercise. So this kind of rounds out the ways that we think about well-being. We do know that the idea of well-being is something that is becoming things that cities and governments are talking about. I'm so excited to hear about Santa Monica. We actually went up and met with them because cities are looking at the idea of well-being as something that they are focusing on, that they care about. And we have looked at the work. We actually had Dr. Vivek Murthy, who's the U.S. Surgeon General, former U.S. Surgeon General, came to visit us. And he said that our social connections are in fact largely influenced by the institutions and settings where we spend the majority of our time. We know that we acknowledge that addressing well-being is not up to just one entity, one institution, one group. We do know that, and we encourage that to be effective around this, it was something that we should all do together. And that the more that we collaborate together and work on this together, the more success that we're going to have. We also know from other cities, the city of Anaheim, the mayor there has a kindness initiative where he encourages stronger community through simple acts of kindness and volunteerism. And then in our beach cities, as Tom mentioned, the cities of Hermosa, Manhattan, Redondo, since 2010, they really upped their commitment to looking at well-being and trying to look at, through our well-being index, a way to measure if that's effective or not. We also, at the macro level, through the World Happiness Report in 2012, they suggested that incorporating happiness or consideration of well-being as a guide for public policy. So they're saying that, let's think about this as cities and governments. Dr. Murthy has also launched a campaign to address loneliness, and has looked at workplaces as one of the primary places where it can get better or it can get worse. And it's a really important institutional place where well-being can be impacted. He also says that this is about changing culture that requires leaders to lead by example. And I think we're really lucky today to be in a room full of leaders who have the choice to say that they want to do something about well-being or have a part in that or role model that in a way that has an impact on your constituents. So I'm just going to go through three concepts that are fairly simple, but I think they illustrate some of the ways that cities can really look at well-being or look at happiness. It's really where the intersection of cities and happiness come together. There's a growing body of work and experts who are making connections between cities and happiness, that are making connections between urban design and mental health, and focusing on people-centered design. Good mental health is pivotal for individual well-being and a thriving and resilient society. And I think that's something as cities that we're all committed to. One of the experts, which is the Gale Architects, which focuses on people-centered design, says that as cities, we have the opportunity to expand the way that we think about our influence beyond traditional city leaders and city roles, as Rick said. An increasing body of research is accumulating to explore how urban planning and design can help mitigate risk factors that contribute to better mental health and happiness. And there are four things I just want to illustrate that come out of the Gale Architects, which is called Mind the Gaps. So it looks at green place as a concept, that important relationships between accessible green space and open space has a direct correlation to mental health and well-being. The second thing is active place. So it's looking at embedding action opportunities into cities, things like active transportation or outdoor gyms. I know Redondo and Manhattan are looking at some of those outdoor kinds of installations. The third thing is called pro-social place, and that really is about creating interesting and flexible public spaces that involve citizens at every stage of development and design. And the fourth thing is called safe place, knowing that a safe environments improve accessibility, and risk-averse city design can actually reduce action opportunities within cities. The second thing I wanted to share are a couple of examples. We know that communities, how communities activate space matters. In small-scale interventions that can enhance public life in cities are really important. So there's a few things that I wanted to highlight. One is called social trust matters. It correlates to economic growth and living longer. And it also is about building an emotional infrastructure within cities. And cities can decide to do that or not. Adding gardens and greenery or culturally relevant art to locations can increase the likelihood that people will stay in places or that they'll bring visitors and bring friends back to those places. Community involvement in planning and design, stewardships of these sites can not only create benefits, but it also increases visitors to cities. And then we have a second example here with the rainbow intersection that's called a tactical intervention, which is the fourth thing. They support sociability and trust among strangers. And these are just some examples from a couple of cities that we've looked at. The third example that I have here is looking at the city's effects on design. They include looking at mixed use. That's an important part of looking at well-being within cities. Higher density is something. And then how to connect planners and planners and builders to research. Even microdoses of nature help. Investing in lively street edges is a concept that comes out of some of the experts that we've seen. So in Vancouver, British Columbia, this is an example. They had Home Depot come to town and they said, oh, we want to open a Home Depot in Vancouver. And they, lots of people had feelings about that, bringing a big box store into a neighborhoods. And so what they said was, that's fine, well, you can come in, but we're gonna put Home Depot on the second floor of this development. And we're gonna put 9 businesses, small businesses, along the edge, the street edges of this development. And with that, what came out of that was that they had a safer experience, it was more walkable, people were kinder, and it was more healthy. And that was something that they studied as part of this development process. And also the developer made more per square foot. So looking at this, you don't think of a Home Depot, but it really was a way for them to think about design and do it that way. So the last thing I'm gonna just cover is Blue Zones project, a little bit about that. So this is called the Life Radius. Blue Zones project for us, and I was so excited to hear Dr. Torres Gill talk about aging in place. Blue Zones is about an environmental approach to policy and improving well-being measurably through that. And it really looks at not only individual well-being, but it looks at the places and the policies that we have in place in our organizations. A quick thing, we have the Power 9 principles. These are the kind of founding principles of Blue Zones project that we're implementing in the beach cities since 2011. And we know that about half of them have focus on physical health, which we've done really well with. Collectively, Hermosa, Manhattan, Redondo have the 3rd highest well-being score in the country. We've also been able to drop overweight and obesity by 25%. So those are some pretty cool stats. But as Tom said, and we also have had practical solutions like the adoption of the Bike Master Plan across the South Bay, the Harbor Gateway project, where we've seen an increase in bike traffic, and also the businesses have seen an increase. But the other half of our Power 9 principles relate to social emotional health, and those are the ones that we really aren't doing well at. We see super high stress levels, as Tom mentioned, and I think the one I'll just kick off in handing it off to Tom is that we have the 2nd lowest score in the country for the question, do you have a leader in your life that inspires enthusiasm for the future? And that is not, we didn't define leaders, so it could be anybody. But it really, I think, underscores the role that our leadership, the people in this room, have for the role that they can play in impacting well-being.
So we've just started to do some work on this leadership concept. These are things that we think is a good matrix for looking at, okay, how do we move forward as leaders, inspire a shared vision and model the way. So as leaders, people are watching, and if we want our citizens to kind of take it easy, let's work on a solution, I think they're going to be looking at us and how well we're doing that. Great leaders are great learners. We're all here today learning. So you're already doing that, celebrating and recognize and enabling others to act. There isn't a magic sort of pill or solution here. It's something that we all have to do together. The success that we've seen in the beach cities is really around the entire community coming together, whether it's schools, leadership in the cities, parents, kids, and so it really truly does take a village to build a healthy community. So practical solutions, there's the mayor of Redondo Beach up there doing a stretching exercise. Again, our leaders have embraced this. We have mindful activity happening here. We have on the right, I don't know when, that might have been right before the oil vote, which was something that we did in Hermosa, which was interesting, where we brought the community together right before one of the most contentious decisions that they'd made in 20 years, and we did a mindful activity there. We have mental health first aid training in the schools. So these are all things that we're doing as a community, and something that the health district, along with the cities, is facilitating. And then we have youth charrette happening with our youth. So these are just some ideas here. I mentioned a couple of these. Some others are the Empathy Project. That's something going on in Hermosa. Nudge signs. We've been over that. We've got to be careful with those. Support worksite wellness is something that we're doing with the city of Redondo Beach. I think a lot of times when people hear about worksite wellness, they think about nutrition and exercise. Yes, extremely important, But what's also important and what we're focusing on is community, social, and finances. Those are also components of well-being, well beyond, of course, just eating right and exercising, which is extremely important. One thing that we'd like to talk about is maybe developing a well-being leadership toolkit that you all could take back to your cities. That's something that we'd love to do, love to work on. So that's something that we'd like to talk about in the future. So I love this photo. These are what we're teaching the kids. This is what they're embracing. We're doing this in all the schools in the 3 school districts. We're going to do a mindfulness practice. I don't know if we have enough time. If you all want to do that, we can do that with you today. And then we're going to bring it back, of course, to Star Trek here, where, you know, again, I'm a geek, but we think Spock had it right, you know, live long and prosper. We just, how cool is that? We saw how cancer is being cured. So we're going to live longer, but what's that going to look like? And how are we going to adapt to that? And I know for me, when I have different reactions to the same thing, whether it's the yelling guy, like sometimes that would bother me when I was sitting in the chair up on the dais, and other times it wouldn't. And for me, the sort of realization I had was, wait a second, I'm the variable. If I'm having a different reaction to the same thing, then maybe it's me. And so I think that's our message, that it really starts with the individual. And if we're going to be living a lot longer, which it looks like we are, we're already seeing that, we want to find out a way to prosper and to live well. So thank you.
One thing I want to say to sort of ground this is our Constitution begins with the famous preamble, "We the people." And we probably haven't read that in a while, and but we probably all will recognize it, you know, when it rattles off. But we the people of the United States of America, and there's a series of things that the government was set up to do. And one of them is to promote the general welfare, right? So this is not a new idea. The general welfare of the community ultimately is a higher level of outcome than we have 5 libraries or we provide police protection. It's the general welfare. All of those things are means to the general welfare. That's why we establish governments. We don't establish them to provide specific services. That's the means. We provide them to promote the general welfare. So that's really what we're talking about, is better defining, better measuring, and actually achieving better outcomes for our general welfare.
Thank you so much. We greatly appreciate your perspective, and it's been just very enlightening what's happening in the cities. So thank you. And we have some gifts for you. Let's give another round of applause for our panel. So we want to thank you so much for coming. We are going to do the drawing for that fabulous weekend at the Terranea in about 2 seconds. But we hope you found this information today helpful and interesting as we addressed the importance and value of learning from the past as we look to the promise of the future. And I just want to emphasize how important the work of the COG is in helping us work together as a region to address and confront these various issues, because it gives us a strength of working together in a larger group and the power that we can experience in terms of helping our residents. So we thank you so much for being here today and supporting our efforts. We look forward to seeing you all at next year's General Assembly, which is going to be Thursday, February 27, the last Thursday of the month. So thank you again for coming. Great seeing you all. Thanks.